Georgetown University campus, much like 27 other Jesuit colleges and universities in the U.S., abounds with student energy and optimism. Less immediately apparent to the casual observer is something all Jesuit universities have in common: a dedication to a brand of Christian commitment to community and service that can be largely traced to one Jesuit priest named Pedro Arrupe. September 13th, 1983. Father Pedro Arrupe makes his last formal appearance as head of the largest and one of the most prominent religious organizations in the Catholic Church. The warm reception he enjoys at his farewell fails to reveal the agonizing turmoil that has led to this day and to the election of his successor. Only those present might note the significance of small details. Kissing the hand of Father Detza, who Pope John Paul II had appointed to replace him 25 months before. The wiping of a tear by Father Vincent O'Keefe, his second in command for 18 years.
My most respected and dear Father Arrupe.
The story of Pedro Arrupe turns out to be of a man whose life is shaped by course-changing events in the history of the world, of the Church, and the Society of Jesus. He was born in the same fiercely independent Basque country of northern Spain that had produced Ignatius Loyola and Francis Xavier more than 4 centuries earlier. Pedro is the youngest of 5 children. His mother dies when he is 10, his father 8 years later. At the early age of 15, he leaves home to enter medical school at the University of Madrid. In his first year, he wins the top prize in anatomy, the first of many awards. He is on his way to finishing medical school in the top tier of his class when he accepts an invitation to visit the Marian Shrine of Lourdes as a member of a commission responsible for attesting or not attesting to the validity of miraculous claims.
For me, Lourdes is a city of miracles. I stayed there for some 3 months. I was thus the witness of 3 miraculous cures from the very moment they took place, in the midst of the faithful who were praying to the Virgin Mary, and then on through the medical verification that was carried out by doctors who were atheists. This impressed me very much, because I had often heard my professors in Madrid, who also were atheists, speak of the superstitions of Lourdes. There was born my vocation.
It is 1927 when Arrupe embraces the secluded life of a Jesuit in training. His studies return him to his Basque homeland in the shadow of the basilica dedicated to Ignatius Loyola. By 1932, Spain is on the brink of civil war. The new Republican government sees the Catholic Church as a cause of many of the very social ills it seeks to cure. The Spanish Republic's new constitution expels all Jesuits from the country. Arrupe joins his fellow seminarians in exile, first in Belgium, then in the Netherlands. After being ordained a priest, he continues his theological and spiritual training in the United States. It is now 1938, at the brink of World War II, when he is unexpectedly assigned to become a missionary in Japan. Already multilingual, Arrupe dives into his study of Japanese and a lifelong mission of intercultural understanding.
I must say that at the time, I did not focus on the transcendent aspect of the missionary experience, but rather on certain negative personal aspects, the discovery of a reality different from what I expected, and above all, the feeling of loneliness. And I experienced an even greater loneliness when I went to Ubi, 21 hours by train from Tokyo, for my first mission assignment, although I spoke Japanese only very poorly. Another important personal event was my imprisonment for 1 month in Yamaguchi. Japan was at war and I was suspected of espionage. I spent days and nights in the December cold, entirely alone. Many were the things I learned during this time: the science of silence, of solitude, of severe and austere poverty, of inner dialogue with the guest of my soul.
When later he was made the director of novices, these were all Japanese with some Koreans. For this Westerner to deal with somebody from a completely different culture was very difficult, but he had made it a point to try to get inside the culture so he could really talk to these people, and he was good at it. In fact, he ended up writing about 6 books in Japanese on the spiritual exercises.
August 6th, 1945, begins as an unremarkable morning for Arupe and his young Jesuit students on the outskirts of Hiroshima. The hum of an approaching airplane does not seem particularly threatening. They're used to hearing armadas of bombers overhead. Today, there is no siren to raise the level of fear.
So on August 6, 1945, when the first atom bomb fell on Hiroshima, Arupe and his group were just outside the city limits. They heard it, and everything flew apart in the house. They didn't know what it was.
The fate of Father Arupe and his novices is later filmed for the record by the American government.
A group of Jesuits who were teaching in Hiroshima witnessed and survived the explosion. Between 0 Point and the main building of the novitiate of Jesuits was a hill which served to lessen the intensity of the blast. Yet, despite this protection, the glass in the doors of the main entrance foyer were shattered, and the paneled ceiling was blown loose by the force of the explosion occurring 4 miles away.
Father, would you introduce yourself, please?
In future years, Arupe would be called upon many times to tell his story, beginning immediately with U.S. newspaper reporters and military investigators.
What were you doing in Hiroshima at the time of the explosion?
Suddenly, we saw a blinding light, like a flash of magnesium. We heard a formidable explosion. After about 15 minutes, we noticed that in the direction of the city, dense smoke arose. We climbed a hill to get a better view. Before us was a decimated Hiroshima.
Father Arupe, he's been famous for that, for having been one of the witnesses of the falling of the first atomic bomb.
I shall never forget my first sight of what was a result of the atomic bomb. A group of young women 18 to 20 years old clinging to one another as they dragged themselves along the road. On and on they came, a steady procession numbering some 150,000.
Arupe had a lot of medical experience. He had stopped studying just short of becoming a doctor. So he was picking glass out of people's backs. He found some boric acid and a little water, and it was a powder, and it turned out that was a very good thing for the burns. But they dealt with people there. Then they took a lot of them back to the novitiate with them and kept some of them for a year. So this was all part of his formation.
Yo creo que es fundamental. Yo comienzo mi biografía.
I think it's fundamental.
I begin my biography with the moment the bomb was dropped onto Hiroshima, and he's there below. In the burst, the spiritual explosion that is produced in him at the moment he stops and sees the watchtower stop at 8:15. The tremendous energy that results helps cure 150 sick who show up at his hospital thanks to a bottle of boric acid that he finds.
Assuredly, it was in such moments of tragedy that we felt God most near to us.
And this seems to have marked him very much. A kind of feeling of having been close to the end of the world. To have been present to one of the most dramatic events of the history of mankind. That remained with Arupe, I think.
Ever after that, he could never stand violence. He'd say, violence, no, to be avoided no matter what the cost.
The 1960s erupt in a different kind of explosion. Social upheavals that alter the course of world events more extensively, perhaps, than even the atomic bomb. Ecclesiastical upheavals are triggered within the Catholic Church by the election of Pope John XXIII, who throws open church windows to the winds of change. His encyclical Pacem in Terris will address not just Catholics, but all men of goodwill, demonstrating fresh openness to the world. Only 90 days after his election, he unexpectedly invites all the bishops from around the globe to gather in Rome to re-examine the stance of the Catholic Church in a changing world. This 21st Ecumenical Council, the first in almost a century, becomes a major news event.
Considered one of the most important councils in Catholic Church history, Vatican II saw 2,400 bishops and other prelates in 168 sessions from October 1962. The council produced 16 documents designed to modernize the role of the Church in world affairs.
The council would meet in 4 sessions over 4 years. Its crowning document, the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, would address itself without hesitation not only to the sons and daughters of the Church and to all who invoke the name of Christ, but to the whole of humanity. The council's decrees will inspire and guide Pedro Arupe as Jesuits become leaders in the implementation of the Church's modernization. Pope John XXIII dies before the council is completed and is succeeded by Pope Paul VI, who oversees the conclusion of the council. Shortly after the death of Pope John XXIII, the Superior General of the Jesuits, sometimes called the Black Pope, Father Janssens, also dies, and Jesuits from around the world gather to elect his successor. Among the gathering Jesuits was the president of Fordham University, Father Vincent O'Keefe.
In 1965, we had what we call a general congregation. This is our highest legislative body in the society. And so it's a meeting of Jesuits from all around the world, Jesuits who are elected in their own province to go to the big meeting in Rome.
Immersed in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, Jesuits face their own challenges of change. Priorities need to be examined. Commitment to justice rises for special consideration. On the third ballot, the General Congregation elects Pedro Arupe to be their Superior General on May 22, 1965, and goes on to pass wide-ranging reforms. Arupe will be thrust unprepared into leadership that requires him to transform the ranks of nearly 30,000 Jesuits to address a new world order.
Father Arupe's first official words as general were a quotation from Jeremiah. I don't know how to speak. It's strange, you know, this is a man fluent in 7 languages. But when you read through the rest of the quotation, you realize that Pedro Arrupe is saying that he really doesn't know how to speak, but the Lord will talk for him, and the Lord will teach him how to speak. And he certainly did. He was a very articulate spokesman throughout his whole life. The heart and soul of that message was his basic option did not oppose the church to the world, but rather it considered the church in the world.
The message of spiritually engaging the world promoted by John the 23rd and the Second Vatican Council, as well as by the Jesuit General Congregation, would nevertheless prove to be a challenge for Pedro Arrupe.
I accepted what the society gives to me, elected me as general, and the first thing to come to my mind is a big cross. That is, I think I was bound to suffer in the rest of my life very much, because I suppose always a general has to suffer. But in this condition of the church, I think it's something special, which has tremendous changes, so many affections, so many problems, so much insecurity. But it's another aspect of to be a general, who is the source of great joy. And that is to have the possibility of knowing the society and the Jesuits from inside.
Arrupe will turn out to be an apt advocate of adapting the ministries of the Jesuits to the modern world. He is aware that finding God in all things and encountering Christ in the world are insights resulting from intense soul-searching on the part of Ignatius Loyola. As a novice master, he had immersed himself in the writings of the Jesuit founder. The profound spirituality he developed was based on the example of Loyola, whose passion was to discern the will of God in his life, a life that embraces the world he lives in. In 1965, the General Congregation that elects Arrupe concludes that the spirit of St. Ignatius calls for more active engagement in working for social justice. Arrupe enthusiastically embraces this direction, but not all Jesuits will be happy with it.
When he was elected General of the Society, it was just before the last session, the most decisive session of that Vatican II Council. And he got extremely interested. He felt that it was a turning point for the Catholic Church. The point which was decisive for him in the Council was the opening to the world. Particularly, I think, he felt that we had to look at the world around us in a new way.
Arrupe energetically embraces the message of the Second Vatican Council and the 31st General Congregation concerning the Church in the world.
He took the message from Rome. He went all over the world talking to Jesuits. He wanted to talk to Jesuits. But he was so personable, so knowledgeable, so convincing. It wasn't that he just made the vision credible, he made it infectious. That was the thing he had. He made it infectious.
It's such a richness today in the world, coming today to a new birth. We are in a very interesting moment of the history. Today we have a challenge that perhaps never had in society.
You can appreciate a tremendous dynamism in the church today. And that comes for the tremendous change, social change, technological change in the world,